This week, we rewind to January 2019, when Prince Philip, just months short of his 98th birthday, was involved in a dramatic car crash. The Duke of Edinburgh escaped serious injury after his Land Rover overturned in a collision that left the passenger injured and sparked headlines around the world. From driving again within days to being pictured without a seatbelt to mounting pressure from the injured passenger, the story sparked a fierce debate about privilege, accountability, and whether the Queen's husband should still have been behind the wheel at all. I'm Matt Wilkinson, and this is Royal Exclusive Rewind. Joining me to look back are royal reporter for news.com.au Bronte Coy and Talk TV host Mark Dolan. Welcome to you both. Now, this was the day that I'm sure we remember. We almost lost the Iron Duke. We almost lost Prince Philip, the indestructible Duke of Edinburgh. This was a serious car crash. I mean, if we look at the pictures, which we'll be looking at the last couple of days, his Land Rover turned over. He was just shy of his 98th birthday. This could have gone wrong.
Absolutely, and we hadn't seen much of him because he had retired from official duties a couple of years earlier, and I do still remember when these pictures came through. As you can see, it was shocking. It's incredible that he wasn't injured, and particularly as you mentioned that it was right before his 98th birthday. So he's a level of frailty to that age, of course. But this was quite shocking. Any member of the royal family being in an accident is, of course, big news. But the level of this one, and as I say, the way that these pictures were beamed all over the world, was quite a devastating moment. But then what followed, of course, was controversial.
Well, tell us what happened, because this was January. And I've been January in Sandringham. It's cold. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, all right. It's quite bitter up there, January in Sandringham. He was driving near the estate. What actually happened? What do you remember?
Well, what seems to have happened is that Philip is driving his Range Rover and he collides with a Kia, and there were injuries. Luckily, there was a 9-month-old baby that was unharmed. But one woman, Emma Fairweather, had a broken wrist and other minor injuries. So it was a serious collision, and as you say, dramatic pictures. And we heard from Prince Philip that he was suffering, like, with the visibility was an issue, that the sun was low, and that somehow he just didn't see the car. But we've never really got to the bottom of why this happened. Mm.
Well, I've been up there and I kind of back up that story by Philip. It is a nightmare of a junction. But, I mean, it brings up all sorts of issues. He was driving just 2 days later. We'll get on to Emma in a bit, but he was seen just driving 2 days later and without a seatbelt. I mean, what does this say about Prince Philip and about the...
Well, Prince Philip was known for being a man of his own decisions and not someone who would really take a lot of advice from many people. But with that said, when this happened, of course, to the original point, it's devastating seeing those photos. It would have been quite traumatic for Emma with the baby in the car. The optics of this happening, 2 days later, him back behind the wheel, when clearly there were still questions to be asked about how this had happened and his driving capabilities at the age that he was at. It's a really difficult conversation. Even now, I find it difficult to word this correctly, because I think that it's a very relatable experience, which is, with all of my grandparents, conversations had to be had at a certain point about whether they should be driving. There's a level of independence that, of course, is taken away that they feel when that happens. But when this is a member of the royal family, of course, and this has unfolded, that everyone's seen the pictures, he's then driving 2 days later, people still don't really have answers. And as we then learnt from Emma doing a TV interview, he hadn't reached out to her at all.
So this is Emma went on to morning TV and she showed off her injured arm, but she said it's highly insensitive and inconsiderate towards me and everybody involved.
Well, she waited, as you said, 10 days for a letter from Prince Philip. He was a character, wasn't he? He wasn't a man that would be told what to do. And even though he had retreated from royal duties, he had his pride. And I think his masculinity, his identity was tied in with being the head of the family. Part of that would be that he drives himself around. He prized his independence. And it's interesting because all of the royals seem to love driving themselves. Queen Elizabeth was, of course, famous in her headscarf driving the Range Rover, and even the notorious Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, even with a massive bruise on his face, is driving around the Sandringham estate. So it's a trait that the royal families like to drive themselves. The problem you've got with this story and why it was a scandal in 2019 and it brought unwelcome headlines, is it created the impression that it's one set of rules for the royal family and another for the public. The idea that he, as you say, 2 days later, this is in many ways, tone deaf, isn't it? Exactly. Because you think, all right, hopefully I'll drive again, but I'll leave it for a month or two. 2 days later demonstrates hubris, entitlement, arrogance, not a good look. And again, breaking the rules by not wearing a seatbelt. But clearly he wouldn't be told. And it was a damaging episode and a sad episode. And as you've said, Bronte, comes a moment in your relationship with your older relatives when you have to say, is it really a good idea for you to drive? And it's a painful moment. It's a big transition.
So it's 3 weeks after this incident, he voluntarily surrendered his driving licence. And I think many people were saying, what, he's still driving at 97? But he was not prosecuted. But, I mean, how close do you think a guy, late 90s, how close do you think he was to actually perhaps dying?
Well, that's it. Again, when you see the photos, it's quite shocking. And it is, as we know, tragically with so many road accidents, it's one split second. It's a matter of, one tiny change or movement and anything could have happened. I think it's extremely lucky that it wasn't worse than what it was. But perhaps it was then the push for him to, you say he voluntarily gave up his licence, as we know. I question how many conversations...
Can you make Prince Philip voluntarily do anything?
Maybe the Queen sat down with him and they had a chat. But I think that was the motivation for that to happen, which I think is crucial because it was probably at the point where that really needed to stop. And as you say, it is interesting, though, the royals do love driving themselves around. On that, I think that it is just more broadly, their lives are so structured and they're surrounded by the people and they're constantly in the back seat and having their itineraries created and moved from place to place. That's their moment to sort of get in there and drive. But he had his years of doing that. And as we know, it was just a couple of years later that he passed away. And so, he was at a point in his life where it certainly was an important conversation to have with him.
There is the stories, a legion of royals and also Hollywood celebrities trying to shake off their bodyguards just so they can have a normal existence for 5 minutes. Sylvester Stallone was endlessly in trouble with his mother for sneaking to Starbucks without his bodyguard. And so, of course, the royals, they crave that freedom and independence as well. But the headlines are that it's a merciful good fortune that nobody was killed or seriously injured. Although, that said, in particular, so, he survived and told the story. But can you imagine if the driver of the Kia or the passenger or the 9-month-old baby had perished in that accident? It would have been a significant crisis for the monarchy.
Absolutely. And that's why what then followed with him giving up his licence, etc., was so important and significant. Obviously, the royals read the room on that. It was also the fact that he was, the 2 days later, the fact that he was given another car that looked identical and he's behind the wheel. It's almost that idea of you can do that and then immediately, here's the next one, off you go. So I think that in those initial days, a lot of PR mistakes were made at the very least. And the fact that he waited 10 days to write this letter to the woman.
And I think it was insensitive of Philip to drive 2 days later.
Do you?
Yes, I do. I agree.
Because I just think that's classic Philip. I think he would have enormous kind of, if the woman and the child has, enormous, sympathy for them and worries about them, and if they were seriously hurt, I think he would be devastated. But I think he's just the kind of character that goes, oh, well, minor crash, off we go, I'll carry on driving. And he had to almost be dragged kicking and screaming. I don't know this. I'm assuming he almost had to be dragged kicking and screaming to give up his licence and also write that letter, because that did feel a little bit out of character. I think, I think he's a nice guy, and I think he would, if someone was seriously hurt or seriously injured, he would go and look after them. But I think his attitude was, he's the kind of guy that just goes, yeah, I rolled the car, I'll just get up, get back into the car, carry on driving, everyone move on with their lives.
Because he wasn't self-important, and it is important in his absence. The guy's not here to defend himself, and he was an amazing man. He was the Queen's rock. He's a pivotal figure in our history, and I was incredibly fond of him, as I suspect most of our viewers were. He was such a character. He provided ballast for the royal family, for the Queen. I think he was a loving and attentive father. He was a great guy. Plus, by the way, eye-wateringly funny.
Yeah.
And politically incorrect, and, took no prisoners. So we love Philip. But I think we can say, therefore, that this was a rare misstep. And it was a poor judgment to get back in the car 2 days later. I don't think we can judge him, by the way, for flipping the car, because as you said, that was a tricky junction. We've all had minor prangs on the motorway.
No, it's not that. It's more how much that highlights how serious it could have been in terms of injuries. It's just it's quite shocking. And I do agree with everything you've said. And I think that again, it's quite a relatable thing, these thorny subjects around elderly people and the end of their driving careers.
And I know for sure what will be said in the comments on this show, which is older viewers of this show saying being old does not make you a bad driver. And I think that's really a good point. You could be 103, and if your brain is working and you are in the absence of drugs or alcohol, then you may well be a safer driver statistically than an 18-year-old. So that's the other argument, is we shouldn't demonise older drivers. If you're fit, you're fit. If you're not, you're not.
Well, you're absolutely right. But the reality is these are conversations that come up there when there are issues like this, and it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. And I think that's the part that people can relate with. But of course, it doesn't mean that if someone is a certain age is a reckless driver or incapable of driving. But when you reach that era of your life, which is near 100, it's a conversation.
It's worth pointing out what you're talking about. We'll have to wrap up in a minute, but it's worth pointing out that when you're talking about him surrendering his licence or being too old to drive, it was only, I think, a year or so early he'd actually retired from public life. He was still working. He was still capable to go out and do engagements up to about the age of 96. So, he would have assumed, or people working with him or meeting would have, of course, he's able to drive at that age. Of course, there's not an issue. He was out doing engagements just a year before.
Well, it could just be that he was very unlucky with that accident. And as you say, a sort of perfect storm of a low sun, cold conditions. Who knows whether the driver of the Kia had a case to answer. And what's interesting is we never really got to the bottom of it, did we?
Well, if you're an ordinary member of the public, do you think they would have got to the bottom of it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if let's imagine that it wasn't Philip and it was a regular guy, Joe Bloggs, they would do a breathalyzer test if there's no alcohol in your system, if there's no evidence of speeding, if there's no evidence that you were on your mobile phone. What exactly would the offence be?
Yes.
The offence, apparently, is being old. I think that's the conclusion here. And it's very sad, as you say, when someone gets in, they lose their independence in the late 90s. Yeah. And it was just literally 2 years later, I think, attended the funeral at St George's Chapel for the late Duke. And, we miss him.
Yeah.
We do,
but it was good to talk about him, and I'm sure, as I say, I'm sure we just brushed it off as just a minor scrape and just thought, what is all the fuss all about? Let's just get on with it. Back out driving.
Well, I agree. In his defence, I know we'll wrap this up, but in his defence, I think that perhaps the reason why he got back in the car and the reason why he was so no nonsense about it is that he didn't want to make a fuss.
Yeah.
There
we go. True. All right, and we've given him loads of fuss today. I appreciate you. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Right, that's all we have got time for on this week's Royal Exclusive Rewind. My thanks to my guests Bronte and Mark, and to you for watching. Join us next time as we dive back into the Royal Archives to relive another unforgettable moment from royal history.